Chapter 7 Born from the Tides. Facing northeast from the balcony of his good father's castle, the high tides, Damon imagined he could see across the ocean, glimpsing a tiny dark shadow which may be the volcano crater on Dragonstone. 13 years before, that had been his seat of power, back when Damon was the heir to the Iron Throne and the Prince of Dragonstone. Now Damon was 8 in line, falling further for each royal breath the high tower and his knees squeezed out. Instead, Rhaenyra was the heir to the Iron Throne and Princess of Dragonstone. The girl Damon had always known would be queen. He just assumed she'd be his queen consort, not the queen. Damon had a plan once, but as all political schemers would experience sooner or later, plans were fickle to the whims of fate. Once upon a time, Damon thought his brother would annul his mummer's farce of an unconsummated marriage to his bronze bitch, and he'd marry his niece when she came of age instead. That way, the king's line would have continued through the pure Valyrian children of his daughter and his brother. Everyone would be happy, except the cunt, Otto Hightower, and that was only a boon. But life hadn't turned out how Damon expected, and being back in Westeros, so close to the place he'd once called his castle, made everything flood back. 3 years of war in the Stepstones, and giving up his crown as King of the Narrow Sea hadn't been enough to win Damon his brother's daughter, but it had been enough to grant him Corlys's. Laena was a fierce dragon rider, a beautiful wife, a good mother and a graceful lady with the blood of old Valyria. Everything he'd always wanted in a wife, except not his first choice. It was ironic. If his brother was less of a lapdog, wagging at the High Tower's commands, Laena could have been queen and Damon king, though not at the same time. What ultimately brought them together was being spurned by his brother. When Viserys chose his daughter's whore of a best friend above Laena for wife, she'd kept her head high and gone off to claim the largest living dragon in the world. When Viserys exiled Damon, he'd gone to war and won himself an ocean kingdom. They might not have been each other's first choice, but anyone could see they were well suited. Pondering the many could've, would've and should've's was meaningless, and surely an ailment of aging. Somewhere down the line, Damon started looking back at the squandered possibilities above dreaming for the future. Damon had seen 8 and 30 years pass. In 6 years he'd be the same age his father was when he died. Maybe Laena was right to claim Damon used to be more than this. More than some Malden prince, sneaking back after his brother had exiled him twice. Though what did it matter? Viserys was the king. His word was supposed to be law. But he was too weak to hold firm. He was too soft, too afraid of confrontation and too eager to please. Damon had always known his punishments only persisted until Viserys' anger cooled, which was never longer than a couple months tops. So which other rulings were being ignored? Enjoying the familiar view, cousin? Damon turned around, greeting his cousin Princess Rhaenys Targaryen with a nod. Laena had inherited the eyes and smile from her mother, and after years of marriage it was unnerving to see these familiar traits in someone else's face, directed at him with a polite facade in place of the genuine warmth of his wife. Rhaenys had never favored Damon as a suitor to her only daughter, but her opinion mattered squat to him, or to any of the other lords of the realm for that matter. It's the ocean. I've seen it many a times before. Where is your husband? Corlys invited Rubius Hagrid and Harry Potter to lunch. He wished to learn more of their home island, Britain, Rhaenys said, walking up to stand next to him by the railing. Poring over maps again. To think the sea snake has not come across their island. It's unexpected, Rhaenys said, pondering. Yet sailors are always wary of the enormity of the sea, though the items of their homeland are remarkable. If my husband has come across their likeness during his voyages, they be on display in the halls of Nine as we speak. Rhaenys paused her trail of thought, and said, if she couldn't quite help herself, do you believe their way of life is how it once was in the Valyrian freeholds? Rhaenys didn't know the half of it, but Damon nodded in agreement anyway. Very likely. He'd spent many an hour browsing through the book Hagrid and Hariel had gifted him, Ariel said the title of the book was A History of Magic, and though Damon couldn't read a single one of the unknown letters, it tells several moving paintings, a magical window into another world, making it near invaluable. Damon made sure to keep it locked in the treasury since arriving. It was the history to their magic, possibly holding deep knowledge and old spells. Their society held on to an abundance of the Valyrian magic, but less of our dragon culture. I've been told the land has many dragons, both wild ones and those raised by man, but they do not ride them. To fly dragons was lost to them as surely as the magic spells were lost to us. Rhaenys cocked her head slightly. Yet Lady Hariel has an excellent grasp of Norbert, and Lena told me Hagrid tried singing a lullaby to Vhagar. Damon smirked to himself. He'd seen that himself. Dragon rearing doesn't seem to be the issue, it's weaponizing them. It's a curiosity, Rhaenys murmured. Of course, Vhagar hadn't given a shit about Hagrid's song, and instead of calming her down, as he was trying to do, the dragon had turned around, rejecting him. That mishap aside, Damon couldn't dispute the giant's proficiency in dragon rearing. Moondancer showed a noticeable growth spurt in the months under Hagrid's care. Her scales toughened while horns and spikes hardened. She was livelier and now spent most of her days flying or playing with Norbert. After his success with Moondancer, they'd asked Hagrid to look at his daughter Rhaena's egg as well. As the egg hadn't hatched in almost 8 years, they didn't have much hope, though it was worth a shot. Hagrid had examined Rhaena's dragon egg thoroughly, from tapping his pink-clothed stick against the shell, listening to the egg and holding it under fire through several bizarre experiments, before shaking his head in apology. Looking like he might cry, Hagrid had bent down to his daughter and put a massive but gentle hand on her shoulder. He had said something unrecognizable in their odd language, but his careful tone and mournful eyes matched what Lady Hariel translated. Our magic can help in many ways, but it cannot mend what is already dead. On the horizon, Damon saw a shape rising into the sky in the direction of Dragonstone. Which dragon was it? Was the wild dragon Grey Ghost out fishing again? Had Vermithor come out of his lair to stretch his wings? Lena and the twins are settling in nicely. My daughter is exultant to be home, though she'll be relieved once the baby is out. She tries to hide it, but I can tell she's grown very uncomfortable with this pregnancy. That'd be my fault, Damon remarked. Rhaenys' lips turned up at the corners. Not insincere, but not warm either. Her pale violet eyes followed his line of sight, noticing the dragon in the sky as well. You know, I spent many days looking towards Dragonstone when you were its lord, Rhaenys admitted. Ah, right, Damon agreed. That'd be another thing you can put on my shoulders. You were only one of several, Damon. I have put the Lord's vote at the Council of 101 behind me, and long ago accepted I would never sit the Iron Throne, Rhaenys said. Though I wonder, have you? Of course I accepted the ruling. You know how far I was willing to go to support Viserys' claim? Rhaenys cocked an eyebrow. You're known to go too far in most of your endeavors, Damon, and most often than not it resulted in estrangement. Is that not why you took my daughter and grandchildren traversing through Essos, rather than stay within reach of his powers? If you recall, Viserys didn't quite approve of our marriage. It grated. Even when it wasn't his daughter, Viserys had kept denying Daemon a Valyrian bride. The only wife Viserys had deemed suitable for Daemon was Rhae Royce, a marriage that had dragged on for a decade, whilst fostering hatred and no children. Daemon scowled. In the meanwhile, his brother had married twice, taking a wife he desired both times with short-sighted regards for the repercussions. Daemon had once been Viserys' fiercest champion and loudest supporter, willing to war against the Velaryons with dragons and armies to give his elder brother the crown. And now Viserys chose to bestow all the fruits of Daemon's labor on Otto fucking Hightower. What had supporting Viserys ever gotten him? To be named Hand of the King? An annulment from the farce of his first marriage? A worthy castle and a sea to rule of his own? No. Daemon was always being sent away. Now Daemon stood on Driftmark, in the castle of the Lord of the Tides, married to the Sea Snake's daughter. More a fucking seahorse than a dragon. You offended his grace when you didn't ask his blessing, but my husband approved it, even after you killed our daughter's previous betrothed, Rhaenys said. Laena's old suitor was a spendthrifting lark-witted craven with the audacity to challenge me to a duel. Only after weeks of goading him into one. And it was his own folly to do so against the master swordsman of my excellency. Rhaenys sighed, a long suffering thing. That aside, the king was once offered Laena's hand in marriage himself. Had you presented yourself at court, you know you would have given the marriage his blessing, or risked souring the relationship between our two houses once again. Yet you did not, choosing to do as you please. It was a calculated choice. My brother has never been good at holding a grudge. My husband expects you'll mend your relationship with Viserys now that you're back. I'm sure your expanded household is a boon the king won't ignore. You've potentially saved the kingdom from powerful future oppositions the sort a dragon falling into the wrong hands could cause. The king won't forget it. Daemon could read between the lines here, and turned to her unimpressed. We only just arrived, and you're already suggesting I travel to King's Landing and present Rubeus Hagrid and Ariel Potter at court. Or after your child is born, Rhaenys said. Bring Laena and the children. Our king will be delighted to see how his family has expanded. I will do as I see fit, Daemon said purposefully, unwilling to entertain plans for showing for court yet. Not until Hagrid and Ariel were more indebted to his side. Before some Gannet Hightower tried stealing what was his. Again! Rhaenys huffed. Don't you always? The door creaked open and the maester came out onto the balcony, grey robes billowing in the wind and his chains clinking. Princess Rhaenys, your lord husband is still at lunch, but he bade me share this with you promptly. He held out a slip of parchment that Rhaenys read. It's from Laenor, Rhaenys said, looking at Daemon pointedly. My son writes from the Red Keep with glad tidings. Princess Rhaenyra gave birth to another boy, Prince Joffrey Velaryon. Daemon barely held back his initial retort. Does your son mention if this one bears a marked but entirely coincidental resemblance to the commander of the City Watch too? Congratulations on your new grandson. Because brown of hair or not, Rhaenyra had 3 sons while Daemon only had daughters. And he just dropped to 9th in line to the throne. A fortnight later, Daemon was awoken by the steward before the crack of dawn. Enter, Daemon called groggily. This better be fucking dire. It wasn't, and yet it was, because one of the dragon eggs was hatching. Daemon nearly fell out of the bed, barely taking the time to pull on his boots and throw a rope. Daemon entered the stifling hot chamber, finding Corlys, Rhaenys, one of the dragon handlers and Hagrid standing around a stone table with the egg at the center. Has it hatched? Daemon asked, walking up to look for himself. It hadn't, though judging by how the egg swayed from side to side and the cracking shell, it surely couldn't be far off. Somehow, Daemon had never seen an egg hatch in person. Excellent work, Rubeus, Daemon said, knowing the giant wouldn't understand him. The man was too distracted by the egg to care about much else. The egg was from the latest clutch laid by Rhaenys' own dragon, Meleys. It had been incubating with one other egg at Driftmark for a year before Daemon suggested letting Hagrid try to hatch one of the eggs, using the methods he'd implemented to hatch Norbert. Now here they stood, and sure enough, the egg cracked within the hour. A small black and purple dragon breaking free just as the sun rose on the eastern horizon. Breakfast was an exalted event that morning. Everyone within the high tide celebrated the second hatching to have ever happened on Driftmark, the first being Seasmoke, the dragon bonded to Sir Laenor Velaryon. The baby dragon is so small, Baela said in Valyrian, which had become the twins' naturally spoken language whenever Ariel was in the same room. Daemon wasn't sure they even noticed it anymore, but then his daughters were raised speaking as much High Valyrian as Common Tongue. Like a clumsy little winged lizard. To think Moondancer was ever that small. Bela laughed, using her hands to imitate the unsteady movements of the dragon to Hariel. She was, but back then you two were young too, only a year old. Lena chuckled, but then her eye twitched and she pressed a hand against the side of her stomach. Her long-practiced smile hid most of her growing discomfort though. Her labors could happen any day now. According to the Maesters, Lena had already gone a moon longer with this babe than the twins. The dragon will be mine to claim, will it not? Rhaena gushed, face flushed and purple eyes shining with excitement. May we visit again after breakfast? Please? Hariel can come see it too, and I should be there so I can bond with the dragon, shouldn't I? The baby dragon is too young to bond with anyone yet, Lena reminded their daughter. It's only an infant, less than a day old, and all it cares of yet is food and survival. It won't bond with anyone before it's strong enough to care for itself. When will that be? Rhaena asked. We'll judge the dragon's maturity as it grows. Only time will tell when it's ready to bond, Princess Rhaenys said, exchanging a warm smile with Corlys. Once the dragon is old enough though, you may bond with it, Corlys said, smiling at his granddaughter. Then can I name the dragon? Rhaena pleaded. No, Daemon and Lena answered in perfect synchronization, as neither would allow for another Norbert situation with this dragon. Lady Hariel, will you inform Hagrid we're holding a feast in celebration of the dragon's hatching tomorrow eve? It'll be held in the Hall of Nine, Rhaenys said, turning to Hariel. Hagrid had passed over breakfast, too occupied with the dragon. I will tell him, Hariel said to the princess. Hagrid will be busy feeding the dragon. Baby dragons need a lot of care. When Norbert hatched, we hand-fed her 8 and 40 times a day for weeks. That often? Corlys said, and even Daemon startled. 8 and 40? Every day? No wonder Norbert is so big, Daemon remarked. It was tiring, Hariel said heavily. The memory seemed to cause her some upset. Then we may have to wait before tasking Hagrid to hatch the second egg, Rhaenys said. I will send food to him in the Dragon Vault. The other handlers will relieve him of his duties so he may rest, as well as for the feast tomorrow. I've already ordered the steward to see to Hagrid's needs. Fortunately, his common tongue is good enough to make himself understood with simpler demands, Corlys told his wife, before shifting in his seat to Daemon and Lena. It's been a busy morning, but I've got other tidings to share. In the excitement of the hatching, I've been remiss in informing you, but a raven arrived last night. Princess Rhaenyra and Laenor are moving to Dragonstone. Moving? Daemon asked, startled. Permanently? Corlys nodded. Indeed. But that is wonderful, Lena said, her smile brightening. I've missed my brother. It'll be great to have him close again, and our children are much of an age too. Though Rhaena wanted to name her future dragon an absolutely impossible word to pronounce, Gryffindor, a name she'd picked up from Hariel's tales of her homeland, Princess Rhaenys was the one to do the honors. Since the dragon was black-scaled with purple spikes in eyes, the princess landed on the name Ebryon, the Valyrian word for night sky. The feast wasn't for another day, but Daemon and Corlys started the celebrations early that afternoon with a bottle of Arbor Red shared in the Halls of Nine. I've missed the taste of a proper strong wine, Daemon said, smacking his tingling lips and appreciating the heavy flavor on his tongue. Not that pale sweet swill of Pentos. A toast to Ebryon, Corlys said, and a servant rushed forwards to fill Daemon's emptied cup. To Ebryon, the smoke offer of high tide, Daemon toasted, making Corlys laugh deeply. They'd been friends since the war in the Stepstones, and hadn't shared a drink this way since Daemon wedded the man's daughter. Combined, this puts our tally of dragons up to 7, Daemon. He frowned. Does it? The last I counted, your household had 2 and mine 3. That makes 5, Corlys. Sea Smoke is bonded to my son. After Laenor married, Sea Smoke counts as part of Princess Rhaenyra's household, not yours. Daemon pointed out meaningfully. Corlys arched a brow, but allowed a correction. Then there's Norbert. Daemon nodded. As of yet, they're allies and friends. Officially, we're in talks so Hariel can become Laena's ward. But words are wind and only blood binds. I won't safely count Norbert before Hariel marries into the family. So that is your plan? To marry Lady Hariel Potter into one of our houses? Corlys asked for clarification. Daemon gave him a deadpan look. Of course that was the plan. Corlys held up a hand. My confusion is excusable after what happened with the Prince of Pentos, Daemon. Reggio tried to undermine us and swindle Rubius Haggard for Lady Hariel's hand from under my nose. Assuming the language barrier would work in his favor. Instead of gaining a dragon, he's lost all. That's the risk of participating in the game, Corlys said meaningfully while Daemon took a deep gulp of wine, hoping oblivion would take him soon. You played it better, Daemon agreed, though not perfectly. Corlys' wife lost the Iron Throne to Viserys, and his daughter was never made queen either. But despite his losses, Corlys steadily held firm and increased his firepower. Literally. Then who? She's of an age for a betrothal at the very least. In fact, my wife told me Hariel flowered recently. Daemon chuckled. Haste was Reggio's undoing, Corlys. There's time to steer her in the right direction. After the Prince of Pentos' failure of a proposal, Hagrid made it very clear Lady Hariel will not be betrothed until she's of an age in accordance with the law of their homeland. Which means when she's 7 and 10. The right to decline such attempts was one of the demands they had us agreed to before joining us here to Driftmark. You agreed to this? Corlys' surprise was audible in his tone. I'd think the situation a bit precarious, and yourself too impatient. It is worth the risks. And it was. The more Daemon learned of him, the more he saw that Hariel and Hagrid were a couple walking contradictions. Hagrid was twice a man's height and 10 times as strong. He had the potential to be a monster in battle, as close to undefeatable as a man could be, and that was before one factored in his ability to wield magic. And yet Hagrid, for all his natural-born gifts for violence, was a fucking lamb. Daemon knew the nature of men, from the craven to the brazen to the foulest of the foulest. On the scales, Hagrid was basically a sweet summer child. Hariel was much the same. Her aptitude for magic seemed greater, as she could turn a knight's sword against themselves, was a dragon whisperer with a dragon bond. And yet she didn't use it for gain, but to maintain. To do anything else hardly crossed their mind. Daemon was too familiar with schemers. He was nursed in the viper's nest of King's Landing amongst all their fucking politicking, and these two had next to no ambition to rule. It was baffling. They had a dragon, but didn't grasp the true scope behind its potential. They thought about it pragmatically instead of adventurously. King Aegon and his sister wives conquered 6 out of 7 kingdoms with 3 dragons, proving with fire and blood that one dragon alone could equal all the armies, gold and castles of 2 constituent regions combined, and 3 together could dominate 6. Control of a dragon was a dowry worth all the wealth and lands of the Reach and Westerlands combined, yet somehow Hariel had not expected Prince Reggio's proposal. Not that Daemon would have allowed it to pass. He'd sooner feed Hariel and Hagrid to Caraxes and run his sword through Norbert's brain before he let some upstart from Essos gain dragons. But it needn't come to that. Once again, Daemon rued that Laena hadn't given him a son yet. Bela and Rhaena were good children, but they weren't a son, and a son would have solved much, both here and in other matters, leaving Daemon with murky options. Do you disagree with my methods, or was Ebrion's hatching up proof enough? Daemon asked. No, I wouldn't go so far. They've already benefited my house more in a moon than some of our allies have in decades. Though why 7 and 10? 7 and 10 is the age of majority in their homeland, Britain. They don't even allow people to marry before coming of age fair. It might be for the better anyhow. The political situation might look different in 4 years, and until then there's no reason to not lay the groundwork. Damon took another sip of wine. With Princess Rhaenyra at Dragonstone, the children will have a chance to meet too. You think to make a match between Lady Hariel and my grandson Lucerys? Corlys asked, having probably thought out this match within days of meeting the foreigners. Not necessarily, Damon corrected. His firstborn Baela was to be the future queen, and it could be done once Viserys approved the betrothal between Rhaenyra's heir Jaehaerys and Baela. But that left the younger twin, Rhaena. In truth, I wanted to make a match between Rhaena and Prince Lucerys. Lady Hariel has already claimed the dragon. Rhaena is my daughter. She will have a dragon in time and has Valyrian blood. Being the Lady of Driftmark is a station worthy of her. Of course it is, Corlys agreed. But Rhaena can bring us allies by marrying outside, whilst allowing Lady Hariel to do the same might bring our houses dangerous opposition in the future. Enemies with dragons, and no blood relation to either of us. Daemon sighed, because that was the crux of the matter. While Rhaena could marry into one of the great houses to strengthen their alliance, the situation was quite different with Hariel. They needed to marry Hariel into the family, not out. Her blood would strengthen the line for future dragon riders, and if it couldn't be of Daemon's own line, it was true he'd rather it be with one of Rhaenyra's bastard spawns than one of the 3 Hightower abominations. But to favor this foreigner over Rhaena, Driftmark was in her blood, and Laena would be outraged. What about Vaemon's oldest son, my nephew Damien? Corlys suggested. Your brother's spawn, Daemon asked slowly. You think I brought a dragon all the way from northern fucking nowhere of Essos to benefit the line of your shit out of a brother? He's been undermining me for 3 and 10 years, Corlys. You exaggerate, Daemon, Corlys argued. Then your mind must be addled on too much strong wine, Corlys, if you do not remember the endless hours you spent in war councils listening to his whining. I distinctly remember Vaemond felt his nagging protestations worth more than Caraxes' firepower against the Triarchy. Your own son named him the Master of Complaints. Corlys covered a smile behind his closed hand, hiding it with a cough, while Daemon didn't bother with pretense. It was only natural to laugh about it now, but back then Daemon had been longing for Vaemond Valerian to leave the safety of the tents to actually join a battle, so Daemon could gut him with Dark Sister and pass his death off as a tragedy of war. He's my blood, your daughter's blood, Corlys pointed out. Consider it. Vaemon's grandchildren and your grandchildren could marry, combining our bloodlines. If not, I assume you've considered one of Viserys' sons? They may be preferable as they are further down the line of succession than Laenor's sons. Daemon looked away, but Corlys kept on talking. Discounting Damien, all 3 Hightower princes are closer to Lady Hariel's age than anyone else's sons with the right lineage, Corlys said, watching closely. Right. Viserys' secondary offsprings by his bitch of a second queen. Daemon had caught sight of Aegon from a distance once, and never seen his 2 other nephews or his youngest niece, and honestly had no plans to rectify the matter. Daemon hardly counted anything that shared blood with Otto Hightower for kin. Before he was made to answer, a servant entered the halls of 9. Prince Daemon, forgive me the intrusion, but Princess Rhaenys sent me to inform you that Lady Laena has started her labors. Daemon shot up in his seat, causing his head to spin. It had been years since he'd had the good wine, and it was hitting him faster than he'd expected. Ha! Corlys clapped his hands together. Then we've yet another thing to celebrate. Tomorrow we'll be feasting the birth of both a dragon and my 6th grandchild. Hopefully you'll get your son this time, Daemon. He turned to the servant. I've changed my mind. Bring in another bottle of wine. It wasn't to be. His wife's pain could be heard throughout the castle until next morning. Laena fought with all her strength throughout the long and difficult labors until the maester finally managed to get the babe out. A boy. At last Daemon got the son he so desired. but dead before his first breath. Lena was left bleeding, weak from exhaustion and inconsolable in her grief. Then the birthing fever set in. "My grandson is dead and my daughter is burning up from within!" Rhaenys raged at the maester. "Help her, you grey rat!" Water was brought in to cool her down along with milk of the poppy, but she only grew worse and weaker, and so Daemon went to Hariel and Hagrid. "You have magic. Do you not have a spell that can heal her?" Having been toe-tipping around with them the entire time, both jumped to please. Though for once they couldn't swish their sticks and repair Lena the way they could a broken cup or plate. Instead, Hariel retreated into the magical chest to frantically browse through the books for a solution. Sitting down on the floor, she opened the first book, took something out of her pocket and put on a face mask that consisted of 2 round pieces of glass balanced inside an incredibly fine metal string that covered her eyes. When Daemon asked what it was and why she wore it, Hariel pushed the item up her nose and responded distracted, "For reading." Hagrid left the baby dragon in utter scare to search out a method to aid Lena as well, and was rummaging through his stores whilst the girl read, a strange division of labor. Daemon had expected they'd know something already, but it turned out healing was a subject neither had learned. They searched for hours until finally... "This is Murtlap tentacles," Hariel said, thrusting a jar into his hand after tracking him down in the courtyard. Suffering a pounding headache and a lack of sleep, Daemon squinted down at the jar of blue slimy worms. "What the fuck? What the hell is this shit?" "Murtlap," Hariel repeated. "The books say it may help Lady Lena's body be stronger, to fight the fever." "You're sure?" Daemon said, dubious the unnaturally blue maggots wasn't in truth a vicious, poisonous creature. Hariel hesitated. "Yes?" Though she didn't sound convincing at all. "Are you certain?" he repeated forcefully, taking a sharp step towards her, looming over her deceptively weak frame. "We only read about it in the book today, and I've never tried it before. It should be brewed in a mixture, but we lack the other, things to put in the mixture," Hariel said, stumbling over her words. "But Murtlap is the most important part of the brew. Others use it before. I thought if there is no other choice." And there wasn't. Lena was burning so feverishly she wasn't making sense anymore. So Daemon led Hariel through the castle towards Lena's chambers, but set off at a sprint up the stairs when he heard the sound of his daughters crying. Storming into the chamber, Daemon found Rhaenys sobbing over Lena, while the twins were huddled together in shock and stricken grief. "My deepest condolences, Prince Daemon," the maester said severely. "The fever took her. Lady Lena is dead." The shock wrapped around his chest like a coiling creature, but Daemon wouldn't accept it, not yet. This blue brew, whatever it was made from magic. Daemon whirled around to the doorway where Hariel stood, hands over her mouth and bright green eyes filling with tears. "You said it could help! Use it, Hariel!" he ordered, but Hariel shook her head, looking away from the scene as if she couldn't bear it. "I'm so sorry, but it's of no aid to Lady Lena now," she said apologetically, because like with his daughter's unhatched egg, with his son, and with Lena too. Magic cannot mend what is already dead.